Hey everyone, and welcome to Private Podcast, where we plug in and explore the intersection of privacy, human rights, technology, and democracy. I'm your host, Derek E. Silva. Today we're speaking with John Gleeson. John is the Chief Operating Officer for Storj Labs, a decentralized and distributed cloud storage network. Prior to joining Storj Labs, John worked at Covisint, a company specializing in enterprise identity and access management and IoT. John has a BA from the University of Michigan, go Wolverines, and a JD from Wayne State University. John, thanks for taking the time to be here today.
Derek, thanks for having me. It's a great conversation. I look forward to it.
Yeah, I see lots of coats around even here in southwestern Ontario, so I'm very familiar with actually both schools. So let's stick to storage, though. Tell me about Storj Labs and what services the company provides, please.
Sure. Storj Labs provides secure and private cloud object storage that's decentralized and distributed across a network of what is today 13,000 different devices sharing storage with us. We make open source software that allows anybody, businesses, data centers, prosumers to run our software and share extra hard drive capacity and bandwidth with the network. And then what ends up happening is that space gets aggregated and delivered as an S3 compatible storage layer to developers to build more secure and private applications.
Awesome. Yeah, I've actually been familiar with Storj Labs and the entire project since, probably early 2018, not long after I started investigating and checking out different projects that were being built. So I got really into it at the time, and then I just got busy doing work instead. But it's great to see the project launched. Like 13,000, I guess we'll call them nodes, devices sharing storage is incredibly impressive. Congrats on that.
Thank you.
So it's great to see how far you guys have come. What are some of the challenges you've come across in protecting and advancing this whole concept of decentralized and distributed cloud storage?
Well, I'll tell you, it is a fascinating space to be in. Prior to joining Storj about 3.5 years ago, I worked in sort of developer tools that were delivered through more of a centralized format, right? And it's a very different experience delivering a consistent service that has high availability, high uptime, great durability, all the things that the developers would expect in a service for cloud storage, but doing that over a decentralized network of basically untrusted storage nodes, people who you don't know, they're anonymous, and they're providing that sort of layer of service. And a lot of the challenges that we faced, frankly, there's sort of the technology ones, right? Just getting it to work at a baseline level where you can encrypt data, you can distribute that data over storage nodes, and you can sort of build in that redundancy.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there's a whole aspect of it that's this incentive layer where driving the right behaviors from those people who are doing those storage nodes ultimately, because there's a benefit, right? So there's an incentive model in place that says when you share your hard drive capacity and bandwidth, you earn storage tokens. But then beyond that, just making sure that people are incentivized to have a high uptime and they're incentivized not to exit the network prematurely or delete data or doing all of those things. And so for us, the challenge has been sort of making sure that it's a great service that provides developers with what they need, protects their data privacy, but at the same time, also is a economically viable and rewarding thing for the storage node operators to do. So that two-sided sort of economy within the network.
Yeah.
There's a lot of challenges in that.
You just mentioned privacy. How do you protect a customer's privacy?
Yeah, so that is probably the number one challenge that comes up when people are sort of looking at us in terms of comparing us against the centralized storage providers. They want to know how secure is my data and how do you protect it when it's stored potentially on not just grandma's computer but maybe somebody who's not so trustworthy as grandma.
Right.
And so what we do is we encrypt the data, so everything is encrypted with the keys only the user has. And we do offer sort of a range of different encryption options to make it sort of a nice balance between maximum privacy and maximum ease of use. And so for the way we store data, everything is encrypted, the data itself, metadata, and it's then erasure coded. And when it's erasure coded, it's basically split into a lot of smaller pieces with redundancy built in. And so every file is split into a minimum of 80 pieces. And then of those 80 pieces, you only need 29 to recover the file. And it's any 29. it's the same, erasure coding is the same technology used in DVDs, or if you get a little scratch or your kid puts a fingerprint on it, the video will
Oh,
still
okay.
play. It's that redundancy. So like much of decentralization and blockchain, um, there isn't a ton of new tech that's been introduced, but there's a lot of things that have been sort of reapplied. So the distributed ledger and some of those things are new, but at the same time, encryption and all of those sorts of technologies that are reliant in there are the same stuff. And so we use erasure coding, and then those pieces are distributed over basically uncorrelated and diverse nodes. And so for the developers, um, any piece of data that's stored on an individual node is encrypted, and it's just a tiny piece of a file. It's basically worthless. There's nothing you could do to compromise that file. And similarly, there's nothing that someone could do to deny access if they had, a single piece. They can hold on to that piece and try and, do a denial of service or something. And it just, you can't do it because the rest of the network will respond. And so it
Right.
ends up creating a really highly available service for developers. And it's also highly private. I guess one other aspect of it is that those tools that sort of keep that privacy, where the data is distributed over those strangers' storage nodes, it also ends up being something that you can turn back around and make available to developers as a feature. And so we found that giving developers control over the encryption and control over the access management from the client side allows them to do things like share data, but share data within the context of client applications. And so there's no access control list or central authority that has track of where the data is or who has access to what. You can
Right.
do all of that client side peer to peer.
I guess that's probably what Video Coin is using, right, or something along those lines, right? If this is like a YouTube, decentralized YouTube type video hosting platform, obviously you don't want every single piece to or every video to have access control placed on it, whether it's a password or username and password or something like that.
That's correct. And so it provides developers, and the video is a great example because one of the interesting things about decentralized and distributed cloud storage is it's best for large files because you're taking those large files, you're breaking them up, and the pieces that get distributed are fairly large. And video streaming tends to work really well because of the large file sizes. And then when those files are distributed, what our tools allow developers to do is build applications that you don't have to log every user and have them have a developer account or whatever. You can just put simple restrictions that just say, okay, this credential, this bearer token is good for this period of time, from for this asset only, for only read-only permissions and things like that, and very granular, down to the path, down to the object, at the bucket level, whatever you want to do. But what that gives developers the ability to do then is you can view a file, but you can't tamper with it. And so all of the data is sort of tamper resistant, easily managed, and you can either choose to have a DRM solution or not. But ultimately, what isn't required is any knowledge about who's watching what videos at any point in time. And so from a privacy perspective, it's fantastic.
Yeah, good stuff. What's on the horizon for Storj Labs, and what are you hoping to achieve?
So there are a few things. Obviously, large scale growth is something that's very important to us because the the way the network works is you have this sort of two-sided usage. You have storage node operators who are sharing the space, and you have developers who are taking advantage of that space. And having a good balance in that ecosystem where you don't have too much supply or too much demand leads to really good, steady growth. And right now we're seeing a lot of great growth based on a couple of things that we just launched a little over a month ago in terms of some new capabilities and S3 compatible cloud hosted gateway and new pricing that's really compelling. But on the other side of sort of that equation, we're also really focused on some additional priorities. And one of those is actually increasing the amount of privacy options that we offer to developers. And so today you can choose end-to-end encryption, you can choose server-side encryption, depending on what's easiest or most natural fit for your application. And we're going to add even more encryption options for developers so that they can have end-to-end encryption and still use a S3 compatible gateway. And then it sort of completes all of the options that developers could want to do in terms of how they secure and make their data more private. And then the other sort of priority for us is also increasing the sort of the capabilities for decentralization within the network and making it much easier for anyone to run, any one of the components of the network. So we have a network where instead of having a single decentralized node, we've actually broken up into a series of peer classes that let people interact with just what they want. They can only store data, they can only share space, or they can run the complete set of services that do that intermediation. And this sort of additional component that we want to do provides like the maximum layer of privacy and security. So if you want to store data in a secure and private way, you can use our developer tools and use the end-to-end encryption, and you're good to go. But if you actually want to control and maintain ownership over absolutely all of the metadata, all of the access controls at every single level, this is an area that we want to explore and add more capabilities for our community.
Okay, cool. So you have a fairly fulsome uh, server node architecture. A lot of the options developers would want already. Working on adding some of those other ones that I imagine you've heard from developers that they want. So besides all that, what issues do you think decentralized cloud storage faces becoming mainstream and more competitive, perhaps as the option of choice as opposed to the alternative within the cloud storage industry?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And I think it's probably a carryover from the early days of decentralization, where decentralized systems sort of have this knock against them that they're the more complicated, slower, more expensive way to do something that's already a solved problem without much benefit, right, in the centralized space. And it's interesting that we heard that a lot early on, and people are like, well, if it's decentralized, it can't possibly be fast, or it can't possibly, have the same durability. And what we're seeing at Storj is we can actually overcome that preconception, because we can deliver a user experience that is, comparable or better to the developer in terms of it's S3 compatible, it works just like all the other tools they've got. But at the same time, we're layering in more privacy and more security tools to sort of make it easier for those developers to build more secure and private applications. But overall, I think that fundamentally we're taking a different approach, and it's that aggregating and sort of securing the disparate resources and latent storage capacity versus building buildings. And it's really the only way that we see that anybody could really enter a market and compete against the Amazons, Googles, and Microsofts, the hyperscale providers of the world. Because who can afford to go and build data centers all over the world and fill them full of racks of servers and populate them full of people, right? It's just not
Not
a
many
feasible
people.
thing to do.
Yeah.
But by kind of flipping that script, we're able to deliver on the privacy and the security. And those are a couple of areas where our research has been consistent that our users basically put privacy and security above performance and price, interestingly enough, in terms of their priorities for cloud storage. And that doesn't mean it can be slow, right? And it doesn't mean it can be super expensive. In our particular case, we've got performance on par, we've got better security and privacy, and right now we're pricing in a model that because we're not building those buildings and we're basically just taking advantage of latent capacity, we're able to pass that savings on to developers and offer a very economical solution for them.
Okay, cool. I think you've already covered pretty well, the differences here between the centralized providers. We don't need to name names. What about differentiating storage from other decentralized storage protocols? Again, I'm not going to name names. People can do their own research, but I've got a couple off the top of my head that I know of at least.
Sure. So there's a couple of things. So we're really focused on the developer market, and so our main focus is um, people who are using the hyperscalers today in their applications who want to build more security and privacy and take advantage of some of the benefits of decentralization. Other companies in our space are really solving, different problems. There are groups that are building decentralized marketplaces for centralized storage. So basically just creating an avenue for people to compete with decentralized providers who have large scale capacity in single locations. There are people who are addressing problems like the sort of archival needs where someone wants to store data in a way that sort of has that blockchain enduring aspect to it, where they want a single location where they can push a book or some information where it will persist for all time. Um,
Right.
and these are interesting use cases, and it's good to see different people solving different aspects of the cloud storage problem in different ways, because it's sort of a rising tide lifts all boats scenario, where every time a decentralized project is successful, or addresses a really specific real world problem that people have in a way that's differentiated from a centralized alternative, it lends credibility to the space. And so we're really excited by a number of the projects that are coming along, and a lot of projects too that have launched relatively recently and are starting to sort of show some promise. One of the, I guess, the interesting things is that there isn't necessarily a lot of competition within the decentralized cloud storage space right now, just because there aren't really providers that are doing the same or similar enough things where you would ever see them, for example, being shopped for a specific use case, right? So
Right.
people looking at NFTs, where it's just long-term storage of an asset where performance or whatever isn't necessarily an option, like a big concern. There are choices for something like that, but again, most of the providers are focusing on a sort of a singular set of things. Like, we're really focused on, again, like the developers in video streaming, in large file distribution, and those kinds of things.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's fair enough. Um, what are some of the other open source projects that you're most interested in, or most excited about?
Yeah, so we're actually we have a real strong affinity with not just decentralized open source, where there's a lot of great projects, seeing that that the transparency for decentralized projects make open source the default. But our CEO comes from the open source background, so he's formerly CEO of Docker, the Linux container company, Ben Golub. And what we've done is we've actually implemented a open source partner program to really increase the level of integration that we offer with open source projects. And the big idea for us is that with centralized providers, a lot of what happens is uh, open source software is used as a loss leader to sell infrastructure. So you go to Amazon, you can spin up a MongoDB, a great, it turns the needle in terms of infrastructure as a service, but it doesn't necessarily result in any revenue back to the open source provider. And so what we do is we provide a way that says, hey, if your project uses our cloud storage in conjunction with your product, we can implement a connector really easily that just passes along a value that says, hey, you get credit when people back up Mongo databases to cloud storage, or when people transfer large files from different servers using FileZilla. We'll give revenue share back to the open source projects. And it's not because the project is our customer, it's because they've sort of referred business in. And so what it does is it creates a sustainable model where, when open source projects use open source distributed and decentralized cloud storage, there's a synergy there, and it results in sort of a long-term economic value to both companies, that feeds the growth of the open source world. But we're really excited about the decentralized providers like Brave, Unstoppable Domains, Orchid, of course, in the VPN space. And we tend to focus on other projects that just have natural affinity. So the ones that have data storage or data moving, like FileZilla and rclone, and a lot of the other projects. And you can check out our website for all the different projects that are integrated with us. But MongoDB and Valero for database backups and things like that. So it's a wide range of things.
Cool. I was going to ask about tardigrade, but I guess we've already covered a little bit about that. So, yeah. But maybe can we talk just a little bit more about it? So,
Sure,
you launched this, I think, about a year ago, right?
we
Um,
did.
it looks like the really big thing is it was the first and maybe still the only distributed cloud storage solution that offered enterprise SLAs. Was that just really important for adoption? Was that kind of what you were talking about earlier in terms of proving that this actually does work just as well as the centralized solutions? What was the big driver there?
Yeah. So what we launched with Tardigrade was sort of two things. One of which was a brand. And so what we did is we tried to separate out the open source project brand, and sort of a lot of the focus on cryptocurrency at the time, and sort of differentiate that from just the enterprise offering, which was just pure cloud storage for developers. And what we found is we were solving a problem that we didn't actually have, right? We actually created more confusion by having a separate brand.
Okay.
Uh, and so having the SLA, as you mentioned there, was critical for us, right? Because ultimately, what we found early on was um, it wasn't enough to sort of market, a decentralized and distributed cloud storage and have a decentralized protocol that made it easy to store data on the network. What was most important was interoperability, that it was easy to use and familiar. And so we launched an S3 compatible gateway that anyone could host and interact with the network as if they were the data center, right? It was a kind of let anybody be the cloud. And the feedback we got was, this is awesome. Love what you're doing here, but honestly, what you need to do is you need to run these things because I just want to store data. I don't want to run anything, right? I don't want to run a node. I don't want to run a gateway. I don't want to be responsible.
I
I
want it to
want
be
you to be
centralized.
responsible. Exactly, right? So just be out there and let me hit it. And so we took that feedback, and over the last 6 or 8 months, we did a lot of user research, both on the user experience around onboarding to make it so easy for developers because the challenge is decentralized applications have that user experience that is somewhat clunky, and we wanted to make it as good or better than any other cloud storage provider out there that we would be just compared against. Any of the big providers all offering S3 compatibility, and so also part of that research, what came back was just sort of we don't want to run anything, you run it. Um, uh, Make it secure and private, and then also make sure that you do have some assurance that it's still, the data is still there after you upload it, because there's
Right.
that perception of, well, is all of my data sitting on, things that could, somebody could just unplug their storage node. What happens to my data? And
Right.
so by layering in that SLA and layering in the sort of enterprise grade ability to manage that, um, we made it a lot easier for early adopters to make that leap into trying it with their applications.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's I've seen before where it's like it's fully decentralized and people are like great, and then they go to use it and like, oh, but it's fully decentralized, and it's for a lot of people, not for everybody, but that does add some friction. So it's kind of
Yeah.
funny to see the go back and forth. On the other hand, just looking at your pricing here, 150 gigabytes of storage and bandwidth, or I'll call it data, data transfer for free per month. It's actually really impressive. So I guess if you're a developer and listening to this and you haven't chosen it already, please do. And it was kind of funny for you to basically list off a bunch of projects or software I already use. I'm actually a FileZilla Pro subscriber because I felt kind of guilty using it for years and years and years completely for free.
Hmm.
Mostly because I was poor, a poor college student or house poor, and couldn't afford or at least couldn't justify paying for it. But that's since changed. So I'm a FileZilla Pro subscriber and trying to give them a little bit of money there. But yeah,
Yeah.
this is actually terrific. I've been looking for a new backup solution, so I'm definitely gonna have to look at ideally what end user client software hopefully uses storage or gives me an easy way to back up
Sure.
to one of these nodes. Maybe if it's FileZilla, and start doing that sort of thing.
You can use FileZilla. You can use, I mean, depending on how technical you are, you can use Restic and rclone. And then if you just want a GUI, Duplicati is a great open source project for desktop backup that works fantastic. And you can
I
use it
could
with
do
the
the other
gateway.
two. Yeah, I could do
Yeah.
the other two, but I'll probably use Duplicati.
Even the real power users, if you have anything that isn't in the command line, you're probably going to use Duplicati just because it's so easy. You set it and forget it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, FileZilla is great. I hear from so many people that are like, boy, I wish my FileZilla came with some actual data storage, and now it does. So there's native support in the free version and the paid version, where you can just go in and you can add a site and choose storage, and you're good to go.
I might just do that. I'll try
Yeah.
FileZilla first. If I don't want to work with that, then I'll change over to Duplicati. Terrific. Something just happened recently. in the country you're from, President Biden, Joe Biden, recently signed an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. I heard about this last week on a daily tech news show called Daily Tech News Show that I listened to.
Yep.
So in the executive order, he talks about zero trust architectures. What does that mean for storage?
Well, it means nothing but good things for storage, because effectively that is the type of architecture that we have, right? And so, um, part of the sort of the issue is just making sure that users' data isn't mined and users' data isn't compromised, and having that sort of ability for users to be able to take advantage of secure and private data sharing and storage without having to worry about any of their data being compromised. And so, is sort of the different aspects of decentralization, one of the things that is pretty consistent through the architecture is most of the architectures feature trust or absolutely minimized trust, right, where it makes sense. And so, um, for for people to have some level of assurance that the data it isn't being mined, there are the, of course, 100-page long impenetrable privacy policies, that sort of, if you're inclined to read, but most people like check, click, yep, I read it. That's
I
that's
promise,
the
Facebook, I read it.
yeah, I swear. But ultimately, what I think the pendulum is swinging the other way. With users really wanting to understand, what is exactly happening with my data, because I think the data privacy is just sort of another area where there is an impedance mismatch between sort of large, either we call them government or large companies that have a huge amount of knowledge and a huge amount of power and a huge amount of economic resource, and there is just an imbalance to what the consumer, what their options are and what they can do. And when you are sort of at the mercy of that machine, it puts you in a situation where you have, most users have and consumers have no idea the huge volume of information that's stored about them, and that's been collected, and how effectively that information can be used in terms of manipulating aggregate buying behaviors, voting behaviors, or opinion behaviors. And I think that that pendulum is swinging back in the direction of people are caring more about their privacy, more about their security, because they're starting to see the consequences. Early on it was, in terms of data breaches and identity theft, but now it's in consequences of societal change and shifts. And so, where architectures that aren't necessarily protecting your privacy with policy or promises, but actual code, mathematics, and encryption, right? There's a strong layer of insurance that, hey, my data is protected because I have the encryption keys to my data and nobody else does. And so it's not that people are like, I won't mine it, I swear. It's, I can't mine it. I don't have your keys. Your data is secure. Please don't lose those keys, or call us and ask us to help you recover them, because that's not a thing. Um, but it is great to see, at the highest level of government, validation that, yeah, this is important. Privacy is important, and it's not one of those things where it's limited to just sort of technology, right? The reason why it's a right of policy, or of privacy rather, is because honestly it's protecting the right of the individual to sort of diverge from the majority. And it's that right that drives innovation, that drives any kind of change.
Yeah.
And it's something that has to be protected. And these are technology tools and sort of the beginnings of things where you can say, oh, okay, this is, it's not just important, sort of people in the paradigm, but now kind of government and other entities are sort of catching up with this. And I would expect to see it move forward, but it means nothing but good things, especially for decentralized applications.
That's good to hear. Yeah. Um, we actually just interviewed Jason Pielmeyer last week, and we talked a lot about the international human rights framework, and of course, right to privacy, right to freedom of expression, which kind of go hand in hand. You can express that freedom of expression because you have the right to privacy,
Yes.
and like you probably like you probably did, and certainly I did in the late '90s, early 2000s, just explore. and see what these technologies are capable of. And occasionally you might accidentally do something malicious or come across something that's really, really useful that you may not have come across otherwise. And maybe turn one type of technology and and apply it in a different way because you've made this discovery, like you were talking about earlier about using that erasure coding and that sort of thing from DVDs. So good stuff. Um, I guess maybe on the flip side of that, do you think tech companies like, I guess the FANGs, right, like Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, but we'll also throw in Twitter in there, do they have too much power in this respect, like the ability to data mine and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I honestly do think that there is too much power in those central organizations, and sort of it's a concerning situation because the profit incentive, right, is not necessarily aligned with what is best for the individual, and so decisions get made sort of in a way that is maybe not as transparent as you might like it to be, or just a bit blunt, like completely opaque. And so, yeah, it is deeply concerning that the amount of information that those companies have about individuals, and basically the unrestricted ability to use that information is concerning. And it sort of it's counterbalanced by the fact that in some ways it's hard to live without some of those services. So, I'm currently on international assignment outside of the U.S., and I'm located on Grand Cayman and the Cayman Islands. And here, it's a smaller community, and if you want to understand what's going on here from a social perspective, then there isn't that sort of independent way to discover things other than looking at Facebook or Instagram or some of those other sites, which are the primary ways that businesses here are able to market, especially even in small markets like this. And so some of those services are it's hard not to use some of those things and still get by. And so adapting to that framework and finding ways to sort of protect your privacy and on balance, you know, you have to work at it. And unfortunately, many people don't have the time or the tools to be able to sort of navigate the protection of their own data. And
Yeah.
so they are at the mercy of those large organizations.
So to that end, do you have any thoughts on the fines, lawsuits, antitrust investigations that are happening around, especially Google and Facebook, or even just some of the backlash I feel like we're starting to see around the amount of data that they hold and how invasive some of the privacy policies and I think overall the defaults are?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's sort of there isn't necessarily a coordinated understanding you could get if you sort of looked across the different lawsuits and different regulatory frameworks and different approaches to this. But I think it is promising in that when you sort of look in general across all of these different things, what you are seeing is that a recognition that privacy is important and that privacy is more than just something that needs to be sort of looked at from the lens of sort of a government actor perspective, but that the amount of power and wealth aggregated in these organizations and the ability to use that data is worth protecting. And so, who's to say where it will all end up and how it will land? Um, but it's a good indication of what society values and sort of the way forward.
Good. Personally I agree. But if there's a dissenting voice, happy to hear it.
Yeah.
Um, how do you think having secure and open internet access has helped businesses and people throughout the pandemic?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. I think that that overall, technology and adaptations to sort of the situations that have developed in the pandemic have sort of been sort of binary to a certain extent. Like if you're fortunate enough to be in a technology related industry, I think you had one experience. If you were in a non-technology oriented industry, maybe you had a completely different experience. And I think for those of us fortunate enough to work into tech, it's been fantastic. So at Storj, we're fully distributed anyway. So we have 64 people in 14 different countries and 20 different cities, and so we're fully remote as it is. And so we made the adaptation because there wasn't an adaptation to make.
Right.
The biggest impact to us was a few times a year we would get everybody together and just sort of get aligned, and we haven't been able to do that. But for the most part, it's been just business as usual. I think other businesses have adapted in terms of um, some really good adaptations. Like for example, I think that people have sort of had by default to increase the amount of trust in their employees, right? Because if you're not in the office and you're not having somebody watch you all the time, and you don't have that infrastructure and oversight, you just ultimately have to trust that people are going to do the right thing. And in most cases, I think that working remote has proven to be extremely good in terms of being a productivity enhancer. I, Previous to working at Storj, I was not a remote person, but I found working remote, it has been a really interesting accelerator in terms of my own personal productivity. And then I guess the other thing is that for people who are sort of outside that space, it has been really good in terms of like reducing isolation and increasing the ability to communicate. So during lockdowns, and we had a pretty heavy duty lockdown here, and in different places have sort of had different experiments with the different severity of some lockdowns versus others. But ultimately, the video chat and the video communications have provided some really good tools there. And so I think that over time it's gonna have an on balance good impact in terms of increasing transparency, reducing formality. How many times have you seen your boss in a t-shirt and dogs barking in the background, and it used to be, oh, somebody's dog barked, and their kid
Yeah.
walked in, it was chaos, and now it's like, oh my gosh, it's been like 2 days since somebody's kid walked into a video. That's weird. um, and so I think those are overall good. And then I think there are some great innovations in terms of the service industry where increasing access to delivery of goods, and some of those things have all on the whole, you know people who maybe were in industries that were needed some innovation injected into there. This has been an opportunity for that to
Yeah.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah. It's certainly around here. I live just outside of a large city, at least by Canadian standards, a large city. Uh, and prior to the pandemic, you could not get Uber Eats, Skip the Dishes, DoorDash, whoever else to come out here. Like just they just
Hmm.
wouldn't. And even if you were willing to pay a few dollars extra, it just was not offered. And then all of a sudden, it was, and like a full option of restaurants from all across London, Ontario are willing to, or the services are willing to send drivers west of the city in order to service that market now. So that was for us a positive change. Orchid's been remote first for a while. Now it's remote only
Hmm.
as a result of the pandemic. And I know I actually used to work for, but before going to blockchain full time, I used to work for a digital agency, which I adored working for. Occasionally, I was able to do some work remotely, but the managing partner really wanted people in the office as much as possible. And of course, we all respected that. But I spoke to him a few months ago and discovered like he actually quite enjoys this. He's like, you know what? It's not so bad.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm gonna give up the lease on the office. We'll probably have somewhere to meet with clients and that sort of thing, but it doesn't need to be the $5,000 a month that they were paying for this office space in downtown London. And so it's actually freed up quite a bit of capital, reduced operating expenses tremendously.
Yeah.
We used to do like snacks and everything, really Silicon Valley esque. Um, and instead, he can spend that money on better equipment, better collaboration tools, all sorts of other things instead. So, yeah, for even for at least some remote first or remote only skeptical individuals, I think this has been a plus. There's also, the while video can obviously bring people together again and allow you to collaborate in a more natural setting rather than on the phone or purely in chat on Google Docs or something like that. Um, after after 15 months, it's been a little bit isolating. So
Yeah.
to your point of we used to get people together three times a year. Those sorts of things I think are still, at least for probably the next 100 years or so, until we adapt more or evolve out of so much need for social interaction. I think that sort of thing is still really, really important. And certainly something I miss. Like I was planning on going to all sorts of places this year,
Yep.
and so far none of those have happened, and I'm not sure that any of them will happen, not until next year. So we'll see about that. Can you talk a little bit about why you feel, or if you do feel this way, why you feel encryption is important for privacy? We can do obviously really, really simple things like usernames and passwords or access tokens or that sort of thing, but encryption, obviously goes way beyond that. Why is that important?
Yeah, I think building on, sort of the conversation we had a little bit around, sort of the growth in the large centralized providers of services. Ultimately it's an ability for users to have sort of some assurance over the protection of their privacy and their data. And so by using strong encryption, so we have a couple of different aspects to it. So there's a layer of this that is, the developer users, right, and protecting their accounts and protecting their data and protecting, just sort of overall that information from being compromised by hackers or whatever else. But then ultimately the applications that they're building, and the ability to pass that same assurance along to their end users, right? When users are caring more about privacy and security, ultimately that has to translate into some capability. And one of the most obvious, sort of answers is, yes, we have encryption. We encrypt your data at rest and all of your information and the metadata associated with it and who has access to it and who you're sharing with it. All of that stuff is protected and encrypted and managed in such a way where there's a zero trust architecture in place that lets you have, not just, sort of I checked the policy box and it says that probably won't be shared with anybody else and it's secure and safe, to be able to say, what, if I'm a reasonably sophisticated person, I can actually validate that, yeah, this is in fact trustworthy. And the cool thing is that not every user of an application has to be able to say, oh, I can go look at the open source code, get brushed up on Go, and just kind of make sure that nothing nefarious is going on here. They can actually just look at this and go, okay, it's open source. There are people who are looking at this, and it would be immediate and obvious to a category of people that something is awry if it was, and there's no indication that that's the case. And so I think that from a sort of translating that importance of privacy to actually tangible capabilities within an application, encryption is almost the most obvious way to sort of address it.
Terrific. And I like to end with this question. And you don't have to get into specifics. I'm just looking for tools, processes, that sort of thing. How do you protect your privacy online?
Yeah, so I have two grade school age kids, and it is you know I look at and just sort of my personal privacy. It's sort of a balance, right? So, I use password managers to sort of try and sort of manage my credentials and make sure that those are treated in a secure way. I try to use private browsing and limit the amount of information that I do that sort of shares my information online. But it's hard, right? I mean, it is legitimately a difficult thing for any human being to sort of keep their privacy footprint small. Um, I think you mentioned earlier, right? We were lucky that in our youth there wasn't a camera on every phone and a social media in place, because holy cow, does it? Were there some things that I would not like to have to explain right now to anyone?
And
And I look at
archive.org didn't really exist at the time. Like I don't know how far back the Wayback Machine goes, but I'm pretty sure it misses a bunch of stuff from when I was a teenager.
yeah, hopefully, um, but but that's the that's the sort of thing that you have to then teach your kids to now, which is the internet never forgets. And so
Yeah.
there's two category of lesson, which is just be thoughtful about what you do. And if you don't want, mom and dad to get it, or you don't want to see it on the front page of the news, then probably don't put it online. And
Yeah.
then also be polite to the AI. All right, always say please and thank you with Siri because you never know how that's going to end up.
Be nice to the robots.
That is exactly it because someday the
Yes.
power is going to
Spare
shift.
that one. Good stuff. All right, John, thanks so much for taking some time today to be on private. This was a really enjoyable conversation, and I love to hear about how far storage has come from, I think, 80 or so partners or host providers a year ago to 13,000 plus now. It's really, really great to see the amount of growth that the supply side of the network has had. Hopefully, the demand side is also coming along nicely.
Equally good. We're
Good.
very happy with what we're seeing. So thank you very much for having me on. I love to talk storage, I love to talk privacy, and I love to have the opportunity to chat with you. So thank you.
Terrific. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Until the next time, stay free.